don't think very many of us were expecting Apple to finish off this year the way that they have, with brand new chips and new MacBook Pros. Let's talk about it in this video because I have the brand new M3 powered MacBook Pro. I've unboxed it, been playing around with it. Let's talk to you about that in this video. Right, let's set a bit of context for this video. So I've been testing out the cheapest entry-level M3 powered MacBook Pro. And right now, if you are thinking about buying a MacBook Pro, you've got quite a few different options to choose from. Everything from the M2 powered MacBook Airs, and you've got a choice of a 13 or 15 inch in that size. And you also have the option of now the 14 or 16 inch M3 powered MacBook Pro. But which one do you go with? So when it comes to the 14-inch MacBook Pro, visually and from a design perspective, nothing has really changed from the previous generation. You still have that recycled aluminum body, you still have the same design, the look, the feel, and you still have access to all those ports that you would possibly need. You have exactly the same design, and you have the Super Retina XDR display with support up to 1600 nits of HDR peak brightness. Everything else in terms of trackpad, the keyboard, access to Touch ID is exactly the same. Okay, so the big update is internally when it comes to these new chips. The M3 powered chips, essentially we get three variants of those, the M3, the M3 Pro, and the M3 Max. All of these are built on Apple Silicon. They're all built on a 3nm technology. And essentially all of these also come with hardware accelerated ray tracing for the first time. That's where you'll notice the improvements in graphic intensive, but also in gaming as well, that use those elements of ray tracing. But when it comes to the entry-level M3, this comes with 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, and then you can upgrade it to up to 24 gigabytes of unified memory. Now, out of the box, this will come with 8 GB of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. I'm gonna talk to you in a second about what I would recommend you guys do or upgrade to if you can afford it with the budget. But essentially, from a noticeable difference day to day in terms of use, the biggest difference is you will notice improvements when it comes to performance and also battery life if you're coming from an older Intel Core, let's say i5, i7, i9, that's where you'll notice the biggest improvement. And according to Apple, if you're coming from an Intel Core i7 and you jump to an M3, you're gonna notice a 7 times improvement when it comes to performance. The M1 is about 35 times improvement when compared with the M3, and the M2 is about 20% improvement. Really what I would say is I have an M1 and an M2, and comparing that with the M3, there are small noticeable differences and changes, but the biggest difference is you'll notice day to day in terms of workflow and actual physically the improvements when it comes to battery life will be when you are coming from an older Intel-based Mac or even an Intel laptop jumping over to Mac. So comparing the M3 with the M1 and the M2, simple tasks like Final Cut Pro, just rendering times, I can shave off a couple of seconds when comparing with the M2 and about a minute with the M1. Really, the next question that a lot of you might be asking is if you have an M1, you have an M2, should you now upgrade to the M3? And I would say in that situation, it's probably better to hold out unless you're going from, let's say, an M1 and you're planning due to a workflow situation or because you need those extra performances, upgrades, going from an M1 to, let's say, an M3 Max, then it's probably worth considering getting that. But if you're going from an M1 just to an M3, perhaps hold out a little. The other situation and scenario is that if you have, let's say, a MacBook Air with the M2. Now this is an M2 15-inch MacBook Air. And if I was looking to upgrade from this, there'd be a couple of advantages with going with the MacBook Pro now that it's M3. The first thing is obviously access to more ports. If I needed an SD card, if I wanted to connect this to studio display or an external display, it would be easier with the M3 MacBook Pro. The other thing here is the M2 MacBook Air is fine when it comes to things like video editing, for example. But if you were to push it, let's say multiple streams of 4K, longer form content, then it doesn't, I mean, it performs fine, but when you compare it with the entry-level M3 MacBook Pro, you will start to notice the lag that comes off the M2. So from that perspective, the M3 MacBook Pro is probably an upgrade if you're coming from a 13 or 15-inch M2 powered MacBook Air. Right, piece of advice from me. If you do decide to go for the entry-level MacBook Pro with the M3 and your budget permits, consider upgrading the RAM to 16 gigabytes of RAM and the storage, which I wish Apple had given us 1 terabyte to begin with. They don't, it's 512, but do consider upgrading the storage to 1 terabyte. The reason I say that is because from my years of owning MacBooks and using MacBooks in terms of my workflow, I feel like you will probably get more out of your entry-level MacBook Pro by making those 2 updates than you would do without it. I think that's pretty much there is all to say. I mean, we get macOS Sonoma with all those updates related to the software side. We get, you know, the M3 chips, which we weren't expecting. Apple giving us that at the end of the year. You are going to get better performance. You are going to get better performance in this body of the MacBook Pro with access to all those ports, with access to that beautiful Super Retina XDR display. The MacBook Pro now really is a solid device, and it's a device that I use on a daily basis, and I get most out of this device as well. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button and check out more video content here on the channel. I'm M. Kwan, here on M. Kwan Reviews. I'll see you on the next video. Peace and blessings.